Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, both in the lecture theatre here at the Bodleian Library in Oxford and to our very international audience who are joining us online. It's a particular pleasure to welcome you in person this evening because it's our first in-person meeting since before the pandemic. It was January 2020, which was our last meeting in person. Since then, we've kept going online, and this is now our first hybrid event. So we're particularly pleased to be able to offer that, and particularly grateful to the technical staff at the Bodleian who've worked with us for many hours actually to make sure that things run smoothly this evening and you can enjoy the seminar wherever you are in the world. Can I introduce myself? I'm Elizabeth Bagent. I'm one of the conveners of the Oxford Seminars in Cartography. The other convener is Nick Milley of the Bodleian Library, and you'll see him at the end because he'll be fending the questions and putting them to our speaker this evening. We do have a sign-on sheet which will circulate if you haven't had the chance to sign in already. It's for our interests, it's fun to know who comes to each of the seminars, and there's also a space for you to write your email address if you would like to be put on our mailing list and hear about future events in our series. I see that somebody did tick to say that he or she would like to join the email list, but failed to provide an email address. So perhaps that person in particular could supply an address, and then we'll look forward to being in touch. Thank you. While we collect our audience online, could I just let you know about some other cartographic events which are happening between now and our next meeting in Oxford. So in our sister series in London at the Warburg Institute, the Maps and Society series, on the 2nd of March, Dr. Bertie Mandelblatt of the John Carter Brown Library in Providence, Rhode Island, will be speaking on mapping revolution, mapping and slavery, and that's the Hacklet Society lecture, and that will be online, so all our audience, both in person and online, will have a chance to join that. Our other sister series in Cambridge, run by Sarah Vendel, who used to help us convene this series, they have their next event on the 21st of February. Again, it's online on Zoom, and Alan Marcus of Aberdeen will be talking about remapping and place naming in inverted commas, beautiful Dachau. And finally, before I tell you a little bit more about our seminar series in Oxford, could I just very briefly say to any doctoral supervisors or PhD students that there is an opportunity for you to publicise your work in Mappa Mundi, which I'm sure is a journal very many of you are familiar with. It's the main international journal in the history of cartography, and I edit a section there where doctoral students are able to present some of their findings. It's a particularly good opportunity for doctoral students because they can bring their work to a wider audience without prejudicing longer publications later. So if that is an opportunity that appeals to you as a student, or supervisors may recognise that as a good opportunity for their students, please do drop me an email. My name is Elizabeth, the email is elizabeth.bagent@geog.ox.ac.uk. So on to TOSCA, the Oxford Seminars in Cartography, and this is our 30th annual series. I'm happy to say that our speaker admitted candidly that he'd never heard of the series, so that's a rather sad state of affairs. But we have been going now for 30 years. Well, this is our 30th year, and so it's very nice to have a full programme to offer you this year. We have one other event this term, which is in our map reading series, where I I'm in conversation with someone who's written an interesting new book, and our author is Mirella Altich, and we're speaking about her interesting new book, The Encounters in the New World, Jesuit Cartography of the Americas. And that event is going to be online on the 23rd of February. Do join us for that. On the 4th of May, advance warning, we have Madeline Hewitson of the Ashmolean Museum, who's talking about mapping the Crystal Palace at Sydenham in the 1854 to 1936. And at the same month, on the Thursday, the 25th of May, we have an event that's in person only. We have a field trip to the Bodleian Map Room, another exotic location for the Tusker regulars. And this one is particularly nice. Many of you will, in Oxford, will remember Peter Jolly, who was a volunteer in the map room and a very distinguished cartographer, active cartographer in the British Cartographic Society, and it's a memorial event for Peter Jolly, and it will live up to its and his name as a Jolly for Peter Jolly. So do sign up for that if you'd like to join us. There'll be lots of interesting maps to see. But on to this evening. And it's a particular pleasure now to introduce our speaker, Andrew Honey, from the Bodleian Library in Oxford. Andrew has been a book conservator here since 1988, and he does active conservation, but also research and teaching. His works ranged from medieval manuscripts to early printed books and modern literary manuscripts, including work on 2 Jane Austen manuscripts. He's recently completed the conservation and rebinding of the Winchester Bible, and he is an accredited conservator, a fellow of the International Institute for the Conservation of Historic and Artistic Works, and of the Society of Antiquaries, and he's also a member of the English faculty. So we're delighted that he's going to speak to us this evening, and his lecture is entitled, Please Use the Postcode, Navigating the Past, Present and Future Conservation Needs of the Hereford Mappa Mundi. Andrew, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. And now Tosca is sort of etched onto my heart, don't worry. My talk this afternoon will discuss the conservation of the Hereford Mappa Mundi, past, present and future. And it's based on the St Ethelbert lecture that I gave last year at Hereford Cathedral. Now, for those of you who don't know, St Ethelbert, or King Ethelbert II of East Anglia, was martyred in 794 by Offa. And Hereford Cathedral is dedicated to him, and he is also the patron saint of Hereford. And as Elizabeth has said, I'm a book conservator working here at the Bodleian Library in Oxford. But this afternoon, I'm talking as the Conservation Inspector to the Mappa Mundi Trust, a position that I've held since 2020 and that began with my first inspection in January 2020, that is just before the start of the COVID pandemic. Like St Ethelbert, I'm an East Anglian by birth, though the similarity ends there. And I'm beginning this talk with a photo of my father sat in my childhood kitchen in Essex. The Hereford Mappa Mundi perhaps needs no introduction. It is a familiar, perhaps over-familiar object, though probably most of us only know it through reproductions. But however good these reproductions may be, or how attractive a tea towel it makes, the reproductions tend to be more interested in legibility and the content of the map. They do not convey the impressive scale or material qualities of the original, and it's some of these qualities that I'd like to explore this afternoon. So Hereford Cathedral is home to the Hereford Mappa Mundi, and it's one of the world's unique medieval treasures. It measures some 1.6 by 1.34 meters. That's just over 5 foot by 4 foot, 4 inches, and is drawn on a single sheet of calfskin parchment. It's thought to have been made around the year 1300 and shows the history, geography and destiny of humanity as it was understood in Christian Europe in the late 13th or early 14th centuries. Now, I'm no map expert, and you'll see lots of images of it, but I'm not here this afternoon to discuss its content. In 1988, a financial crisis in the Diocese of Hereford caused the Dean and chapter to propose selling the Mappa Mundi. After much controversy, the Hereford Mappa Mundi Trust was formed in 1988 for the long-term preservation of it and preservation in its ancient home at Hereford Cathedral. Endowed with significant support from the National Heritage Memorial Fund, Sir Paul Getty, and members of the public across the world, the Trust oversaw the completion of a new library building in 1996 to house the map and the chained library of the cathedral. And we can see that 1996 building here on the right, and you can see lots of photos of me inside it. So within my talk, I'm going to explain what has happened during my annual inspections, which are planned to coincide with the closed period at Hereford each January. And I'll also describe the small incremental changes that have taken place since 2020. But I also want to begin to explore the past conservation history of this extraordinary map, the people who have been involved, and its past display. And these are all subjects which deserve much fuller studies. I will also share some of the physical characteristics that have most struck me, particularly the map's parchment. And we'll share some of my observations and one very, very minor discovery. So my talk could probably be boiled down to these two phrases. Please use the postcode, and in wetting the back, be careful. The first I've used in my title, and it captures the importance of documentation in the process of caring for the Mappa Mundi. We must, of course, act in good faith when intervening or conserving such an important item. But it's also crucial that we accurately document what has been done and where on the map something has been done, something that has not always happened in the past. The second phrase urges caution when treatments are carried out. And I view my role as essentially a cautious one with regards to the map. And hopefully it will become clear this afternoon where these two phrases come from. David Baines-Cope was appointed the first conservation inspector to the Mappa Mundi Trust in 1993. Though he had advised the cathedral on its conservation needs since about 1980. And I'm now the fourth inspector, and we're going to hear more about my predecessors later. The role of the inspector is to monitor the condition of the Mappa Mundi and to make suggestions for improvements to the trust. This involves a detailed assessment of the map, checking against past inspections, with the display case open, but with to monitor areas of concern. And here I am in my first inspection with the display case open, but the Mappa Mundi still in its case, and I'm inspecting and gently testing areas of paint, ink, gilding with the tip of a very small dry brush to check if any areas are loose or friable or vulnerable to loss. And you'll be pleased to hear that they are stable. But you also begin to see the scale of this remarkable map. Following the retirement of Baines-Cope in 1998, Chris Clarkson was appointed the second inspector in 1999, and he introduced this grid system laid over the familiar poster reproduction of Mappa Mundi to accurately locate his observations. And I've continued to use this system to ensure continuity within the growing documentation. The postcode, if you will, of Mappa Mundi for conservation inspections. This allows us to accurately pinpoint areas of the map so they can be compared across inspections. Thus, the centre of this map, which we'll see again later, can be described as H4V22 using Chris's grid. The annual inspection also offers the opportunity to remove Mappa Mundi and its large backing board from the display case for further assessment or possible treatment. As you can see, this is not an easy job and one that requires some forward planning. Here it's being expertly carried out by Simon Hudson and Alan Cartwright. It is now a 2+ person job, but at one time it was much more awkward and required over 4 people. The ability to see Mappa Mundi flat and under different lighting conditions is fascinating and has allowed me a deeper understanding both of its materiality, but also its conservation needs. Perhaps the least glamorous, but most important part of my job is to check the condition and monitor the performance of the display case. This now has the greatest impact on the long-term preservation of the Mappa Mundi and the ability to provide a controlled and stable environment. It's been the area of most work in recent years, though these changes have been incremental and are still ongoing. So the current stable condition of Mappa Mundi is largely due to Sandy Cockerell, who treated the map and remounted it in 1982. There have been 2 other major interventions, the first in 1855 and the second in 1948, both of which I'll discuss later. But to understand our current approach to the map's conservation, it's important to understand Sandy's work and the issues that he was dealing with in 1982. Sandy Cockerell, designer, bookbinder and conservator, was the son of Douglas Cockerell, one of the founders of modern book conservation. Famously, together they repaired and rebound the Codex Sinaiticus at the British Museum in 1935. Sandy would later settle just outside of Cambridge and would go on to repair and bind many important manuscripts for university, national and other libraries. But the recent concern for the condition of Mappa Mundi begins in 1979 with Nicholas Barker, then a librarian at the British Library. He visited Hereford and suggested to the cathedral a redisplay of Mappa Mundi with possible support from the Pilgrim Trust. This led to a visit by this man, David Baines-Cope, in 1980, then the Chief Scientific Officer to the British Museum. His subsequent report mentions mildew within the case, which he suggested should be treated with a fungicide, and a layer of green baize between Mappa Mundi and its plywood backing board. Sandy Cockerell then visited in 1981, which resulted in a more ambitious plan to remount Mappa Mundi. He undertook minor repairs of the map at his workshop in Grantchester, outside of Cambridge, and repaired and infilled the perimeter of the map, as we can see here with a toned Japanese paper. However, his main efforts concentrated on devising a mounting method that did not require any lining and which would support the undulating parchment of the map. He would replace the previous plywood backing board with a new solid board made from 7 planks of teak. Mappa Mundi floats over this and is attached by 32 parchment tabs around its perimeter and by 11 parchment loops onto the back. And their probable locations are shown here in orange. The loops are threaded onto 4 tensioned monofilament fishing lines that run under the map, and the perimeter tabs locate with Velcro patches onto a circuit strip of Velcro attached to the backing board. Clearly an ingenious method. Investigating this during my first inspection, I noted, and I quote, slightly ponderously, and anyway, I quote, "This is a remarkable mounting system that continues to work well after nearly 40 years and holds Mappa Mundi both securely and safely. The bellying and undulations seen across it may look extreme, but the cockerel mounting method has and continues to support Mappa Mundi safely," end quote. To complete his work, a frame and an ultraviolet filter and glazing were added to the front of the backing board to provide a capsule. But to understand why sandy cockerel needed such an ingenious solution, we need to go back even further. It's now hard to imagine just how Mappa Mundi must once have appeared within its original painted wooden triptych frame. We have this sketch from about 1780, but sadly no early photographs. By the early 19th century, the frame had lost its painted doors, and it was in this state that it was sent to the British Museum in 1855 to be repaired. The work was carried out by the museum's binder, Charles Tuckett, and his men, though it was overseen and directed by Sir Frederick Madden, keeper of manuscripts. Madden's journals are now at the Bodleian, and here I show the detailed measurements of the map within his entry for Saturday, the 11th of August, 1855. Just as an aside, anyone who's worked on Mappa Mundi has been slightly driven mad by trying to measure it. He notes the poor condition, saying, and I quote, "It was fastened down in the frame by a narrow strip of brass all around, secured by large round-headed brass nails. The skin had separated from these nails nearly all round," end quote. He also cautions care in the treatment, stating, and I quote again, "I directed the binder to cut through the remainder as preferable to any attempt to take up the nails," end quote. So that's the 11th of August, 1855. By Monday, the 27th of August, 1855, he was able to report, and I quote again, "Went to the binder's room to look at the Hereford map, which has been cleaned and repaired, lined, and again laid down on the original oaken frame. Once the work is complete, Madden gives his opinion of the work in his journals, and I quote again, "As far as the repairs, cleaning, etc., Tuckett has done a very good job of it, but in one respect, his men have done much mischief," end quote. In removing the map from the frame, the binders had stripped and soaked away a painted, decorated border, which had surrounded Mappa Mundi. Madden confided in his diary, "I am angry at such folly, but the deed is done." These unintended consequences are always a risk with any treatment, which brings me back to my second phrase. In wetting the back, be careful. These wise and cautionary words are taken from this strip of paper used to secure a 19th century note about provenance within this 15th century manuscript now at the Bodleian. A reminder, if one is needed, of the care required when planning any treatment. The inscription is part of the edge of a sheet of penny red stamps, whose leftover gummed edging would have provided a quick and easy method for securing the note for an unknown Bodleian librarian. The full instruction would read, "In wetting the back, be careful not to remove the cement." Penny reds are the British stamp that was in use for the longest period, but it's possible to date this piece of edging by its perforations to after 1855, the date of the first British Museum treatment of Mappa Mundi. Finding this sort of evidence when treating an object, the unconscious past use of datable material, which must have been close at hand, is always exciting for a conservator and can help our understanding of the repair history of items we are called upon to treat. first photograph of the Mappa Mundi was taken in 1868, and it shows it after it had been treated by the British Museum, lined and relaid onto the frame. It remained in this form for nearly 100 years until its deteriorating condition prompted a return to London and to the British Museum again for further treatment in 1948. We were fortunate to have a fuller report this time, though it is perhaps alarming to modern eyes to see the level of cleaning that it underwent, including a thorough cleaning of the surface with milk. The map had been lifted from the frame and was lined with paper in 1855. In 1948, it was permanently removed from the frame and the paper lining removed. Holes in the map caused by rusting fittings from the frame were repaired and a new border of parchment was added. The parchment map was heavily pressed with the report noting, I quote, "After it had been flattened, we found it would rise 4 inches off a flat surface in 15 minutes, end quote. Finally, it was framed and restrained under 1/4-inch plate glass, though cockling quickly returned. It returned to Hereford in 1948 and to this new case that was provided by the Royal Geographical Society. Unfortunately, I don't have a photo of Mappa Mundi in the case immediately after its return in 1948. However, this photo does show the 1948 parchment border that was added by the British Museum, though this in turn was removed by Sandy Cockerell in 1982. And here we have the remains of the original frame. The nail holes around the perimeter are clear, and the lines of rusted fixings from battens to the rear are indicated by arrows, and these match the major damage to Mappa Mundi today. Sandy's repair and new mounting was designed to work within the existing 1948 case, and this photo shows the Cockerell capsule within the case at some time in the 1980s. And just again with the full case as it is today, which now has a facsimile for comparison. Following the planned sale of the Mappa Mundi in the late 1980s, and then its return from London in 1990, it was moved to a new location in the crypt, with I think a new cover over the Cockerell capsule and the 1948 case. A new case and cover were provided in 1993, and in the photo at the right, we can see environmental monitoring has been added for the first time. Finally, in 1996, under the newly formed Mappa Mundi Trust, it moved into a gallery within the new chained library extension at Hereford and into this case, though again built to hold the Cockerell capsule. After Cockerell's work in 1982, Baines Cope had continued to offer advice to the cathedral, and in 1993, he was officially appointed as the first conservation inspector to the newly formed trust, continuing in this role until 1998. Chris Clarkson was appointed the second inspector in 1999, a role he held until his death in 2017. Chris was the foremost manuscript conservator of his generation, and I was fortunate to train under him. And he had worked at the chained library at Hereford over many years. He took on his new role with relish and a quiet determination to both understand Mappa Mundi's needs and to ensure its continued preservation. We've already seen Chris's grid, and his reports are filled with detailed observations that are much concerned with recording both the physical condition and the material qualities of the map at an often granular level. This photo shows him at work in 2011 with the glass temporarily removed from the cockerel capsule. As well as considering the map's preservation needs, Chris worked to simplify the display and to help ensure the map could be appreciated. He worked with both the cathedral and closely with the skilled woodworker Bernard Allen to improve the display while working with and retaining the best of Cockerell's Mount. His first major change came in 2015 when the teak frame that had been bolted to the front of the teak backing boards to hold the filter and glass was removed. The board was now braced from the rear with L-shaped stainless steel bars that allowed for expansion and contraction. By removing the heavy glass, a moving Mappa Mundi was no longer a four-person job, and glazing was now provided by the new display case. A removable overthrow mount was attached to the front of the backing board with Velcro. Bernard, who planned and undertook this work, also designed and provided a new supporting structure within the case. And Bernard, we can see in the case in the check shirt. And here we see the new display in 2015. Mappa Mundi is in the back of the case with the lighting bars within the case on either side of the map. Chris made his final inspection in 2015, and in 2016, whilst Chris was very ill, Bernard completed further changes which lowered and moved Mappa Mundi to the front of the case, following the removal of lighting from within it. Sadly, Chris died in 2015 and Nicholas Pickwoad undertook a single inspection the following year. And this brings us to me. I've already mentioned the assessment part of my role, which has continued. The heavy lifting of conservation treatment had been carried out by Sandy Cockerell, and the condition of Mappa is stable. Chris Clarkson and Bernard Allen have made further improvements to its housing within the display case. So my work has concentrated on smaller incremental improvements. The display within the case itself had improved, but there were still concerns about the case itself. A scattering of light dust could be seen across the surface, and the case was thought to be leaky. Dust was probably the slowly settling stone building dust from the new building. Bringing Mappa forward in the case provided a large area behind the teak backing board, which had been used to add trays of silica gel, which aimed to buffer and control the amount of moisture within the case. However, the poor seal which had allowed the ingress of dust also meant that the rate of air exchange was greater than we would like and had a limited buffering effect on, from the silica gel. In 2021, the seals were changed and any gaps in the frame were thoroughly sealed with silicone. The case now achieves an air exchange rate of 0.02 changes per day, reduced from 1 to 2 changes previously recorded, and the case is now effectively sealed. Working with Nick Grant of Elemental Solutions, a new passive method to stabilise the relative humidity within the case has also been undertaken. Humans are very sensitive to changes in temperature, whereas parchment is very sensitive to changes in moisture. Small changes can lead to larger changes in dimension, and this movement, when repeated, can cause pigments, paint, gilding, etc. to become loose and possibly friable and vulnerable to loss. To prevent these and to maintain a stable environment, 5 kilograms of silica gel conditioned to 50% was placed within the case. This low-tech solution, combined with the sealing of the case, has proved to be extremely successful. So here we have the environmental monitoring chart for the chained library, which is next to the display area for Mappa Mundi. It's a large space, and the green line shows the fluctuations in relative humidity, the parameter we're most interested in. For comparison, this is the chart for the Mappa Mundi case after the sealing and with the silica gel added. We can see the RH gently climbing to near 50% without any worrying fluctuations. You'll have to take my word for it, but this warms the heart of any conservator and allows them to sleep soundly at night. So although the case has been slowly improved over the years, one unintended consequence has been the introduction of this three-piece Velcro, three-piece fabric-covered Perspex mount, held in place with Velcro. It had unified the case and had sort of worked well since 2015, but removing or replacing it was something of a nail-biting exercise, which needed to be carried out in close proximity to the map. The mount was simplified during 2020 and has allowed the interior of the case to be simplified even further. It was removed and temporarily replaced with a vinyl mask during the first lockdown, applied to the front of the glass door. It's also allowed a further element of the supporting frame to be removed from the case, which followed by the first deep clean. And this simpler interim measure of the vinyl mask has proved a success, and we plan to add an additional simple Perspex mount to eliminate any shadows near the edge of the map. So my planned visit for 2021 was first postponed and then shortened due to various lockdown restrictions. And I concentrated during the eventual visit on lightly cleaning the surface of Mappa. This was only sensible once we've managed to seal the case to ensure that it wouldn't need to be done again. I worked with a small portable variable suction cleaner fitted with a high efficiency filter, and with the hose covered with a piece of crepe bandage to act as an additional filter. Working slowly and methodically, I brushed the entire surface of Mappa Mundi with a soft goat's hair brush towards the hair, working in small sections and wearing a head magnifier. Not an easy task with both a mask and glasses. I also cleaned the front of the teak backing board and the teak fillet. And here we can see the same area after my work, with the fine scattered dust removed. And the crepe bandage allowed us to check what had been picked up. This is the filter used when cleaning the teak backing board. It's mainly sawdust, presumably related to changes to the cockerel capsule. But this is from the front of what was collected from the front of Mappa Mundi, a grey and fine dust. Under magnification, it's clearly a fine crystalline dust with some fine wood shavings and coloured wool fibres, probably red, and longer black hairs, which are from the dusting brush. With the most urgent improvements completed, my inspection last year and then this January has allowed time to complete the deep clean of the case and to make some running repairs to Cockerell's mount. The teak fillet covering the perimeter tabs has been altered in the past and required some tender care. But it also offered the opportunity to lift it in places and to further investigate the ingenious Velcro mounting method. The lower right corner had been trimmed and secured with additional panel pins at some point, which had later been removed. Both of these activities resulted in cracks and breaks, and I've been able to repair them. And to line the lower right corner with archival paper to rejoin the fillet. This year I've supported 2 areas of perimeter Japanese paper infill that were pinching at the edge of the fillet. These are now supported with loose parchment patches held in place without adhesive and just by friction. And the upper right shoulder area has also been a concern. The tabs in this area have become loosely tensioned with the map less secure. The cockerel Velcro method has meant that I could gently release and then retension them. It also gave a tantalizing glimpse of the back of Mappa Mundi. We have no photos of the back of it. In 1855, Sir Frederick Madden rather rudely wrote in his diary, just before the map returned to Hereford, and I quote again, "I could not help adding that I regretted that so curious a monument to medieval geography should again be consigned to obscurity and oblivion," end quote. I'm aware that throughout this talk, I've only spoken about people from outside of Hereford who've had a hand in the preservation of Mappa Mundi. But I'd like to draw attention to those at the cathedral, both past and present, who have quietly and continually cared for it. In my short time, that's been the Reverend Chancellor Christopher Pullen, Cathedral Librarians Rosemary Furman and now Jennifer Dumbleton, and Cathedral Archivist Elizabeth Semper O'Keefe. But to conclude my talk, I'd like to look more closely at one element of the Mappa, and one that I find myself returning to and pondering. It's parchment. Mappa Mundi is a single skin of parchment of a remarkable size and quality. Although Hereford is famous for its cattle, parchment throughout history has been made from the major types of domesticated livestock available. In Northern Europe, that is cows, sheep, and goats. I'll give a very brief background about the production of parchment before looking more closely at the parchment of Mappa Mundi. Leather and parchment are both made by first soaking a skin in a solution of lime to loosen the hairs. These are then removed with a blunt blade over a rounded beam. Once the hairs have been removed and the skin turned over, the remaining flesh and fat is scraped away with a sharp knife. And here I'm showing 2 book conservators making parchment at a course that was held in Oxford in 2013, with Jerzy Vanucek on the left, who led the course, and Katrina Powell on the right, who's in the audience tonight. Parchment is different from leather. It's modified by tensioning and is then worked and dried under tension. The skin is tensioned on a frame called a hearse and then worked first in the wet state with a razor-sharp lunar knife. And our modern parchment maker on the right is another Oxford conservator, Jane Egan. It is further worked once it has dried, being converted into a thin, flexible, yet semi-rigid sheet material. The level of finishing depends on its final use. A parchment made for writing requires many hours of finishing work to smooth and prepare the surface. So having seen the process, does this help us to understand the parchment of Mappa Mundi any better? Unfortunately, it's not possible to see the back of Mappa Mundi or to view it in transmitted light, which would show up anatomical features and marks from its processing. We do have this 3D scan by the Factum Arte from 2013, which shows some of the bellying at the edges of the skin and at the edges of the circular map, but these are hard to interpret. I've learned much about parchment from both Chris Clarkson and more recently from Jerzy Vnucek, posing here with a sheepskin parchment he made for an exhibition at the Bodleian here in 2017. And recently I completed the conservation and rebinding of the Winchester Bible for Winchester Cathedral, a project again begun by Chris Clarkson. This is the largest of the giant 12th century English lectern Bibles, written at Winchester and with a huge page of about 58 by 37 centimetres. And I'm just in this photo for scale. Just think of this as a huge book. During the conservation and with the manuscript disbound, it was possible to study its parchment closely. Parchment retains evidence of its animal origins in the form of anatomical features which remain visible in the finished product. And these are especially noticeable in transmitted light. Each bifolium of the Bible, the Winchester Bible, is an entire skin, with the spine running horizontally across the page. On this opening, the head was at the left and the tail at the right. And we can see the marks left by the pelvic bones and the vertebrae at the right. More flexible areas at the belly and leg pits result in a more open parchment, and we can also see these in the finished skin. Medieval manuscripts contain a fantastic bioarchive, and Jerzy was particularly pleased to be able to carefully measure these features to age the calves used for this manuscript. As I said, the largest of the 12th century lectern Bibles. They're from a 6 to 8 weeks old calf, just large enough for the manuscript, but still thin enough to produce a high quality writing parchment. If they were any older, they would have been too thick for parchment that needed to be folded to be bound as a book. And this is the limit for most calfskin parchment used for manuscripts. I've said that the Mappa Mundi is written on one skin of parchment, but that's not strictly true. It was written and drawn on one large skin with a small original patch at the upper right side. And below the sort of shoulder area, we can see that one area is cut as a slight slope. On the photo on the right, we can see this original patch, the edge of it running there. If we go back to Jerzy and Jane, we can see that this is the very careful use of the naturally irregular skin. One just, but only just big enough to fill the original frame. It must have been a special commission, and presumably one that required a specially large and unusual parchment hearse or frame for its manufacture. So with this in mind, what can we say about the parchment of the Mappa Mundi? It is, as I said, a large single skin that measures 158 by 134 centimetres. The spine of the animal that provided it runs almost vertically on the fish map. The head would have been at the top and the tail at the bottom. We've seen this angled cut edge, which is parallel with the spine. And we've also seen this original patch. Great care was taken to get the largest possible size from the skin. And we can relate this to the calf or cow that it came from. I've said that the Winchester Bible was, several times, it's the largest of the giant lectern Bibles made on the largest calfskin parchment that was suitable for manuscript production. How does it compare with the Mappa Mundi? Here we have both of them at their relative sizes. Mappa Mundi isn't just slightly larger, it dwarfs the parchment of the Winchester Bible. And it must have been an unusually large skin of parchment, presumably commissioned as a one-off. But why go to all this trouble? Parchment was routinely joined in the Middle Ages, and here we see the Goth map of circa 1400, which was drawn on two complete parchment skins that were sewn together. Unlike Mappa Mundi, which is calf skin, this is sheepskin, one adult and one much younger animal. And it's possible to make parchment suitable for manuscripts, for manuscript use from both adult sheep and goats, but only from younger calves. Four regular but large calf skins would have covered the Mappa Mundi frame. Was there a reason for commissioning a single very large and presumably much thicker skin? Again, my thoughts go back to the Winchester Bible, where I systematically measured the thickness of the parchment used throughout. The Bible was planned to contain some full-page illuminations, and these were all on the thickest parchment found within the Bible. In this much smaller, it's a small manuscript, 12th century Worcester manuscript, which is written on a fine calfskin parchment, we can see that the areas that were painted and gilded have pulled and distorted the parchment leaves, a phenomenon that is noticeable in many manuscripts. The Mappa Mundi could be thought of as the world's largest illuminated miniature. It was a single thickest skin, especially chosen to help counter the effects of large areas of paint and to help keep the display map flat. This is an area of research that I hope to pursue further. To finally conclude, I offer my one very minor discovery that I promised at the start. At the end of my visit in 2022, I wanted to complete the cleaning of the back of the teak backing board that was begun the year before. This was only possible with the Mappa Mundi out of its case, and as it was supported, I carefully vacuumed the back. I ended up on my hands and knees and spotted this piece of paper stuck to the board. It's the shape of a postage stamp. It's perforated on two edges and has the printed legend, "Please use the postcode," printed in a brownish black ink and with numbers added in ink by hand. Remembering back to the penny red edging, I wondered whether it related to Sandy Cockerell's work. Again, an unconscious use of something close at hand. Through the detective work of Elizabeth Semper O'Keeffe and Janet Nelson, Honorary Secretary of the Hereford and Mid Wales Philatelic Society, it has been possible to accurately date the label and to discount Sandy. It's a label used to complete a pane of stamps in a booklet, and the "Please use the postcode" text was in use between 1988 and 1991. With 1990 being more common. However, the brownish black was used for 20p stamps during 1989-90, with 1990 being more common. It was likely that this label was first issued in January 1990. The label of unknown purpose is a probable souvenir of the Mappa Mundi's last trip to London and its potential loss to Hereford. However, it's more likely to be a souvenir of its triumphant return in May 1990, which led to the establishment of the Mappa Mundi Trust and in time to the employment of a conservation inspector. Thank you.